Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'd like to begin by thanking Ahliauniversity for the opportunity to present today. I'm very happy to be here. So the science of governance has advanced gradually since the Renaissance. Humans started to think, the modern concepts of governance that we have really emerged in the 16th, 17th century and onwards. And they covered academic disciplines. They emerged from philosophy, people like Machiavelli, and then political scientists, and political economists. We're going to the 19th century, talking about people like John Stuart Mill. And then also into the modern era, or into the 20th century, into the science of public administration, which really started in the 20th century. Now, Muslims, throughout the golden age of Islam and thereafter, made excellent contributions to all fields of intellectual inquiry, but political science and public administration are areas where Muslims have not really made many contributions. Ibn Khaldun, who's pictured here, is a notable example, counter-example. He was writing, I believe, in the 12th century or maybe the 13th century. But if we look at the shining names from the Golden Age, almost all of them are working in natural sciences or philosophy. If we look at Islamic sources for inspiration on governance, Quran and Hadith actually give pretty limited guidance regarding good governance. Have some verses, some hadith that say things like leaders should be righteous, followers should respect leaders, leaders should consult with followers, shura. But there's very little by way of detailed instructions. In contrast, when we talk about something like prayer or zakat or inheritance, we have very specific, very detailed instructions from Rasul Izzat Salam or from the Quran on how to perform this act. But in the case of governance, we only have very vague and general, really zoomed out instructions. What I'd like to argue today is that congregational prayer, or Salat al-Jama'ah, is an untapped source of knowledge regarding best practices for governance. So it's normal, first of all, for Muslims to use guidelines from acts of worship as inspiration for how to behave in daily life, including prayer. For example, we're all taught an-nadhafa min al-iman, and when we perform ablution, wudu, in order to prepare for prayer, this is to encourage us to be clean throughout our daily lives and to dress modestly and respectfully and to think about Allah during prayer and even outside prayer. So it's very normal to use that, what we do in prayer, as a source of inspiration. However, Muslims do not typically leverage congregational prayer, at least to the best of my knowledge, as a source of guidance on governance, when actually it is a very rich source. So what I'll do now is I'll give you some examples of lessons which one can draw from congregational prayer, from Salat al-Jama'ah, that apply to modern life. Sorry, I missed that. Okay, so the first is, and this builds on the theme of this conference, which is equal opportunities. The person who leads prayer is chosen purely on the basis of their ability. Okay, it's a totally meritocratic decision. We don't pick the richest person, we don't pick the oldest person, we don't pick the person who's from a certain family, we don't pick the person who is the best looking. We just pick who can perform the task of leading the prayer the most effectively, and that actually that depends on also abilities which are not innate. They're abilities which are acquired through personal effort. Things like being able to read the Quran in the way it should be read, being knowledgeable, being pious. All these are important traits for whoever leads the prayer. Now, obviously, if a group of people, come together for a congregational prayer, it may be that the one who's leading is not particularly good at reading the Quran, but as long as he's the best one from the ones that are available. So meritocracy is very much an intrinsic governance principle in congregational prayer. Thirdly, everyone has equal status. I'm showing a picture of the Hajj here, and we all know, for those of us who've been fortunate enough to go to Hajj, to perform the Hajj, and those who've read about it, that one of the defining or one of the most impressive characteristics of the Hajj is the fact that everybody has to wear basically the same thing, and you're not allowed to put, perfume, you're not allowed to wear jewelry, to make sure that everybody has the same status. And regular congregational prayers are a microcosm of this, because in a congregational prayer, everybody stands. And there's no, if I'm high social status and I arrive late, people don't make space for me to come to the front or anything like that. Everybody stands, everybody has the same status. And then again, that's obviously a very strong governance principle for daily life. Number 4, Fatima mentioned the people make mistakes in Zen and they want to make space for people to make mistakes. Making mistakes in congregational prayer is completely acceptable. Okay, people sometimes they forget a verse or incorrectly recite a verse in the Quran. Sometimes they'll forget a step or perform a step incorrectly. And when that happens, people don't stay quiet and say, "Oh, I won't embarrass the person leading the prayer." No, they correct the person leading the prayer out loud in front of everybody. And then the person leading the prayer doesn't feel that this is some sort of disrespectful act, nor does anybody in the congregational prayer feel ashamed or feel that this is an incorrect thing to do. It's completely normal and it's totally acceptable that when the person leading the prayer makes a mistake, to correct that mistake. And again, that's an important governance principle. I mentioned it in the case of Zain and in the case of every organization we work in. When people make mistakes, we should have the ability to point out those mistakes respectfully, obviously. If somebody makes a mistake reciting the Quran, you don't scream at them and shout at them. You respectfully correct the mistake that they made. Or if they make a mistake prostrating or something, you say subhanallah and then you fix it. So it's mistakes are built in, and correcting the mistakes is a central part of Salat al-Jama'ah. Number 5. Everybody follows the leader if they're not making any errors. So as long as the leader is performing the prayer correctly, then you follow the leader. There's no sort of excessive individualism. We're here to perform prayer, we follow the leader. We respect the leader's authority as long as the leader is not doing something incorrect or inappropriate. 6, those who have special needs follow the leader in a manner that is appropriate for their circumstances. So those not familiar with congregational prayer, some of the non-Muslims with us, this is you prostrate completely in a prayer, but as this person who's sitting on a chair, if you cannot prostrate in Islam, then you don't. You sit on a chair and you do what you can. Prayer is not supposed to be a painful act, and so everybody does according to what they can. And there are special circumstances. You don't get a situation where the person leading prayer says, "I only want people who can prostrate to be in my prayer, and those who cannot can go and find themselves another prayer." No, we make conditions for them, and they're allowed to join the prayer, and we want them to join the prayer in a manner that is suitable for their circumstances. 7, the more people, the better. So ajr, the reward for congregational prayer rises with the number of people involved in the congregational prayer. We're encouraged to have more and more and more people in it because strength comes from numbers, as long as we adhere to the other things like people respecting the leader of the prayer and adhering to the rules correctly. 8, so it's a flexibility. If someone arrives late, the system is flexible enough to allow them to join in. So if you don't arrive at the beginning of the Salat al-Jama'ah, no problem, you can join in, you can catch the last rak'ah, and you can complete the prayer thereafter. So there's flexibility is an important, but there's not excessive rigidity in a congregational prayer. Number 9, probably the most important, rule of law. So rule of law we really usually associate it as a principle that emerged in European societies in the 15th, 16th, 17th centuries and is strongly associated with the Enlightenment. But actually, we've had the microcosm of rule of law in Islam from the days of congregational prayer, because when you perform in a congregational prayer, the person leading the prayer is subject to exactly the same rules and constraints as everybody who is taking part in the congregational prayer. There is no special leeway or special privileges given to the person who's performing. And if they make a mistake, as I mentioned, you correct them. They don't have any nobody's above the law. Number 10, everybody knows who the deputy leader is in case the leader is incapacitated, the leader of the prayer. So one problem we have often in family companies in the Gulf is poor succession planning, okay, where somebody is currently the CEO or the chairman, but if they were to suddenly be incapacitated, to suddenly pass away, then there's a crisis in the company. And because often it's not considered part of good governance or traditional governance to appoint a successor during the time when there's a current leader. In Salat al-Jama'ah, there is a very clear deputy, which is the person that stands behind the person leading the prayer. It doesn't happen often. It's never happened when I've been in a prayer. It's that infrequent. But if, for example, the person leading the prayer was to have some sort of coughing fit or was to fall over or to faint, then the deputy immediately steps forward and completes the prayer. And everybody knows this, and there's no stopping and discussing what to do. Everybody knows there's already a succession plan in place. And finally, and actually potentially most important, leading prayer is first and foremost a responsibility. It's not something which people do because I enjoy being in control of the prayer and leading the prayer and having everybody follow everything I do. It's a very big responsibility. And for those not familiar with Islam, if the person leading the prayer makes a mistake, then the punishment for that is multiplied by everybody in the prayer. He bears the weight of everybody's mistake, so he has to be very careful. And actually that makes some people actively avoid leading prayer. I know people who don't want to lead prayer because they're scared they'll make a mistake and then the error will be multiplied by all the people that are behind them. But for sure, what you don't find is people leading prayers because they just want to sort of be the boss. People lead prayer because they realize that somebody has to lead the prayer and it's the responsibility of the person who's most knowledgeable to lead the prayer. It is not something where I want to be the CEO of this company just because I enjoy being the CEO and having people listen to my orders. In conclusion, so this is just a partial list. I could go much deeper and give you many more nano lessons coming from Salat al-Jama'ah. The fact that Muslims are required to pray 5 times a day means that this source of guidelines should be extremely salient. So even though the Prophet ﷺ did not give detailed guidelines in the hadith on how to govern, and the Quran doesn't contain detailed guidelines on how to govern, actually, the fact that we do this 5 times a day is an indication that actually maybe just the lesson is conveyed in a different language, not through the hadith or the Quran, but through the act of the worship. And it should be something that we absorb and apply to the rest of our lives as and when appropriate. Unfortunately, Muslims have a poor track record in governance, despite Islam presenting these, what I would regard to be clear guidelines via the rules of congregational prayer. So just to conclude, so my colleague, Taimur Quran, he's an economic historian. So he wrote a book about so the Islamic world economically started to lag behind or started to fall behind the Western world around the 15th, 16th, 17th centuries. And he analyzed the reasons for that. And one of the reasons was that the Western world under the Italian, the Viennese, Genoese traders started to develop modern corporations. So governance is very much at the center of why the Western world, while the Islamic world continued to operate businesses as partnerships with 2 or 3 people, which kind of get divided when an individual passes away, in the Western world, they developed corporations which were not tied to any individual, and this allowed them to accumulate capital, and much of the what happened afterwards came from that. So in principle, we've got this baked in poor track record in governance in Islam, which we still see today in many organizations that we work in. However, if we look more carefully in what we do every day, we'll actually find that many of the lessons that the Viennese, the Genoese, and today modern management theory from the US, the UK, has delivered, we already had in our hands from 1,500 years ago, and we were doing it without even realizing it. Thank you very much.